What's up people, TGX here. I'm a big Crash Bandicoot fan, as you could probably tell by my series of videos that spanned 2 fucking years. And I'm every bit of a fan as I was back then, even while half my reviews don't hold up. But ever since that marathon, I have over 100 hours of footage combined kicking around from every game in the series and nothing to do with it. So I figured I'd do that thing that was popular about 27 years ago and review every game in the series in 10 words or less and rank them on a scale from 0 to 10, almost like a real critic. The scores will only be approximations as there's no way to accurately convey your opinions with a number, and they'll only be whole numbers because why not? So there will be some surprises for you guys. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go! Despite what people say, it's still really damn fun. It's like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Some say this game's bad. Some people are wrong. The best damn kart racer ever made. This is the last game that needs a fucking remaster. Bland and forgettable, yet inoffensive. Wrath of Cortex, more like Wrath of AIDS. 3D sensibilities don't belong in a 2D game. Crash Team Racing. In space? I have never played a more offensively bad game. Crash Bandicoot jumps the shark. And sticks the landing. We going with platforming, racing, stunts, or demolition derby? Yes, played this game for an hour, aged 50 years. It's original, it's fun, it's hilarious. How is this bad? It's like Crash of the Titans, but 90% filler. That thing from the 90s completely unchanged minus graphics. Yay? You know what the best kart racer ever needs? Microtransactions! Oh, you thought we were done? Fat chance, fuckface. We haven't covered the mobile games yet, so let's take a look at all the Crash Bandicoot mobile games and review them in 5 words or less. Crash Nitro Kart. But shit! By comparison, TTR's a masterpiece. Wait, this isn't a bootleg? Short but well made. How do you control this? Surprisingly good is an understatement. Fuck, Wario needs to sue. Primitive but pretty good. This game kicks ass. Bored. Literally unplayable. iOS the early years. iOS the later years. Alright, now that was a lot to get through, and no doubt you probably missed some of it, so I'm going to do something that I didn't do in my review series proper, which by the way you should totally check out, plug, and rank my top and bottom 5 games in the series. Remakes and mobile games will unfortunately be disqualified. I'm ranking the main series games as they were when they were new. Starting from the 5th worst, we have Crash Bash. This one hurts me because it's the only game on the bottom list that I played when I was super young. I don't hate this game, but between the insubstantial, shallow, and boring content, a frustrating adventure mode, and a plot that A, didn't need to be there, and B, made no sense, I don't think there's really anything worthwhile about this game, and that includes the multiplayer. I wouldn't have even ranked it in the bottom 5, but recently I actually did try playing adventure mode with a friend, and neither of us had a good time. So even the fun with friends excuse doesn't hold up. Bottom line, this is the last game that needs a fucking remake, remaster, whatever you want to call it, and if that's what's next for the series, then I'm out, because 3 remakes later and I have no reason to believe that this series doesn't exist for the sake of cynical nostalgia pandering. And coming in at 5th best, Crash of the Titans. From the lows of games that I played when I was 8 to one of the last games I played, it was more or less a 3-way tie for 5th place between this, Cortex Strikes Back, and Twinsanity. It basically came down to which game do I remember in the most positive light, and the answer is, no contest, Crash of the Titans. Yes, Crash of the Titans, the game that ruined the series, quote unquote. The series that contained the bottom 4 games on this list. If anything, I'd argue the series was already ruined by 2007, so Crash of the Titans wasn't going to ruin it any more than it already was, and if anything, it ended up elevating it. Crash of the Titans is the last unique thing the Crash series has done in over a decade, with reinvented gameplay that stayed true to the original formula while building its own thing. A fun jacking mechanic that gave the combat layers of depth, easily the best story Crash Bandicoot has ever done full stop, and it's the only Crash game that made me genuinely laugh out loud. And I'm tough to please comedy-wise. Oh, it wasn't the same as the other games. Yeah, because Mario 64 and Sunshine were just like Mario 3. Things need to evolve if they ever hope to improve and grow. You could argue about the redesigns, and sure there were some bad redesigns, but that's a complete non-issue when the rest of the game is so fun. Which, by the way, means that I'm gonna sound like a real fucking hypocrite when I eventually talk about the Reignited trilogy. And coming in at 4th worst, Crash Tag Team Racing. Tag Team Racing is probably the most tragic entry on this list because it had every right to be better than it was, but it somehow ended up being worse than the sum of its parts. The big issue here was focus. It tried to be 4 games simultaneously and squeeze it all into a single disc, and as a result, Tag Team Racing was way too thinly spread and ended up being tragically shallow with modes that ranged from boring to otherwise very unpleasant. It had the building blocks to be a good platformer, but the platforming was pointless and only served as a commute between races. The racing was a single interesting idea with the fusion mechanic undercut by atrocious balance and shallow gameplay. The Demolition Derby simulation was as one note and underdeveloped as it gets, and the same goes for the stunt challenges. If it had picked one thing and stuck to it, Tag Team Racing would be a very different story. Perhaps it could have been saved by a good story, but the narrative was just kinda cringy shit. With an over-reliance on gross-out humor and smug self-reference, neither of which were handled great, and this is on top of the fact that they basically threw out the established personalities of all these characters for weird caricatures so they don't come across as human or real whatsoever. This entire game just seems half-baked. And coming in at 4th best is Crash Bandicoot. That's fucking it. The next person that says that Crash 1 still holds up is getting fucking blocked. Is a relative paraphrase of what one of my rather petty associates have said in the past. Hi Dan, how you doing? I've heard for years that the original Crash Bandicoot has aged poorly, but aside from the subpar save system, I've never really gotten a decent explanation as to why that's the case. I think it's just one of those things you're supposed to think. Personally, I think the gameplay is great. It has a laser-focused design, so nothing gets between you and the primary gameplay loop. There's enough variety in the design to keep things varied naturally, and the actual gameplay, while not groundbreaking, is a stimulating romp that controls buttery smooth. I've gotten shit for saying things like this in the past, but I've never had any issue with the way this game plays, and in fact, I've gone back to this game about 5 times in the past few years and never had a single issue with the way it plays. Sure, I've never 100%ed it without a password, but I don't think this game needs to be fun to 100% to be good. Once you get down to it, this game front to back is about 2 to 3 hours, but it's 2 to 3 hours that I could go back to time and again. And I can't really say that about many other games in the series. And honestly, the save system is pretty bad, but it doesn't get in the way. Just shut up. And coming in at 3rd worst is Crash Boom Bang. This will come as a surprise to no one. It's funny to think that the majority of the bottom 5 is dominated by party games. That is, if you can even define one of them as a party game, because it doesn't fit any other description. Well, other than an abortion, and we will get to that later. That said, Crash Bash was a lame attempt to imitate Mario Party with a unique spin, but Crash Boom Bang makes Crash Bash look like Ocarina of fucking Time. The biggest in the laundry list of flaws with Crash Boom Bang is that it's soul-crushingly boring. I played it for an hour to get to the end game, and it felt like 10 hours. It's a game with dozens of minigames and not a single fun one. Having used an emulator to play it, I have evidence that the number you roll is predetermined before your roll, no matter how many times you reset, and you still move on to the next level even if you come dead last. So it feels like nothing matters. More than anything, it feels like a cynical plastering of Crash Bandicoot on an unrelated game because it doesn't look or feel in any way like Crash, so there's no reason this game needs to exist. It looks ugly, the main villain is awful, I could go on forever, but saying this game is only 3rd worst is probably a controversial opinion. The thing is, it's so boring and so forgettable that I can't stay mad at it. I just desperately want to move on. There are worse games for being memorably bad, but even then, I'd rather take a railroad spike to the mush than ever play Crash Boom Bang ever again. Coming in at 3rd best is Crash Nitro Kart. Sometimes being derivative isn't an issue, assuming you can create something of similar quality while also having enough of a twist to make something truly unique. Crash Nitro Kart is essentially Crash Team Racing, in space with zero gravity mechanics, and that's enough. There's enough imagination on display here, and enough wholly new tracks and mechanics to bring Crash Nitro Kart to not quite as high heights as CTR, but still very high heights. The controls aren't perfect, but they're damn close. The tracks aren't all great, but there are some awesome ones, especially towards the latter half of the game, with some fun utilization of the gravity mechanics, and there are even some ways it improves over CTR, such as a much better villain. I feel like I'm holding back because I need to save my big compliments for the game this rips off, but there's nothing wrong with a ripoff as long as it's done well, and that's CNK in a nutshell. But if you were one of those people that claimed Crash Nitro Kart sucked for being too similar but sucks off Nitro Fueled's dick, welcome to the Hypocrite Club. I'll show you around, I'm a senior member. Coming in at 2nd worst is Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. Looking at it, there's one and only one traditional Crash game on the bottom list. I guess that goes to show you the relative quality standard of the traditional Crash games, even though they became fewer and further between as the series aged. But the one that I call the absolute worst traditional Crash game just so happens to be the first one not made by Naughty Dog. I think it goes to show that the original formula had a shelf life that had already been met by the first 3 games, which is why Twinsanity shook things up so much. But between poor controls, abysmal graphics, gimmicky, unfocused, and poorly made gameplay where 2/3 of the levels were gimmicky or partially gimmicky vehicle sections, most of which were horrible, traditional gameplay that was at best more of the same and at worst frustrating and horribly designed with exactly one new idea, a plot that's simultaneously terrible and in your face with up to 12 minutes of cutscenes at a time which completely lacked substance and told you nothing, terrible performance in every way from glitches, both visual and otherwise, to frame rate issues, and 95% recycled ideas but done worse. Wrath of Cortex was shockingly bad. Some may say this game is good, but some people are wrong. Wrath of Cortex is the Murphy's Law of video games. Everything that could have went wrong, went wrong. Although, crunch was handled relatively well. Coming in at second best is Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. Some people may say that 2 is the superior game, and I don't think people are wrong to say that, but I do think that 2 suffered from a number of issues that can be narrowed down to being the middle child between 1 and 3 without the tightness of design of the former or the mad refined eclecticness of the latter. I don't know, I just haven't really enjoyed 2 all that much when I've played it, but on the other hand, 3 I have very much enjoyed. The core of the game is better than ever, with multiple time periods offering wild and wonderful variants, the likes of which we've never seen, with controls and mechanics smoother and more varied than we've ever seen, making for some true one-to-one satisfying controls mixed with the ever-expanding hazards and gimmicks with a few varying modes that all play well and never feel like too much of a departure from the core game. It was basically as varied and eclectic as you could possibly get without the variety becoming overwhelming, and for what it's worth, this is the game that I could pick up and play anytime and still enjoy. Say what you will, but I will never stop loving Warped! And the number 1 worst Crash Bandicoot game is Crash Bandicoot Purple Ripto's Rampage. And now we've reached the bottom of the barrel. Not just the worst Crash game I've played, but one of the worst games I've played full stop. It's a special type of bad, this one. So bad I had to make up new words like shameplay and maflengent just to describe it. It's a perfect blend of narrative that can only be described as the equivalent of a double murder suicide for its 50 Shades of AIDS and is the worst fanfiction I've ever read, yet it's an official release. Every single trope from the worst fanfictions you've ever read, multiply it 100 times over, then shit all over it, and you'll have a rough estimation of about 1/10 of the horror that this story brings. To describe the story would be to describe a bloodstain, and to describe the gameplay would be to describe the rest of the dead body. I guess this is a party game because it fits no other description, and I guess Random Chaos Simulator doesn't really fit. It has no structure whatsoever, the minigames are caught between boring and atrocious, with a connecting overworld only serving as a commute between missions. It's awful. This game literally looks and plays like a bootleg, and yet is an official release by a major studio combining 2 major franchises, and as a result is tantamount to a double stillbirth. It's the most insulted and infuriated I've ever been while playing a game, and to top it all off, look at it. These look like stills from an amateur Gary's Mod video compressed to hell and back. I can't possibly do justice to how terrible this game is. If you want to find out for yourself, well, good luck. But I pray for your sanity. Fuck this game. If I never have to play it again, it'll be too fucking soon. And the number 1 best Crash Bandicoot game is Crash Team Racing. Crash Team Racing is perfect, or at least as close to perfect as you could possibly get. For what it is, there's not one thing I could call out and say is subpar, except the gem tournaments started to get tedious by the end, and all the bosses by and large are pretty weak. The controls are tight as can be and are instantly accessible, while also leaving plenty of room for skill and finesse. So anybody can pick it up and feel in control, but you also have a very high skill ceiling, so it nails the easy to learn, hard to master quality. The track design is stellar and takes advantage of the deceptively deep mechanics masterfully. The character roster is great, with all the characters you've come to know and love, and plenty to unlock. It's one of the few racing games with a fully fleshed out single player mode, which is hours of fun, and even has a surprisingly well realized story. It's a driving game that's able to mix up its gameplay while staying true to its mechanics, so it can wring every ounce of fun it can out of itself. It looks great, plays great, the music's great. I could gush for hours, and in fact have, but Crash Team Racing is not only my favorite Crash Bandicoot game, but is one of my favorite games. Naughty Dog wanted to go out on a high note while paying tribute to the franchise that brought them to the game. This is not the greatest game in the world. This is just a tribute. Good night, everybody. Well, anyway, that's all she wrote. I digress that me and Crash are on a bit of a timeout right now. After the Insane trilogy, I was happy to see the series back, albeit in the most safe way possible, but after Nitro Fueled was announced, I decided I wanted nothing to do with the series because I'm not convinced the series doesn't exist for the sake of cynical nostalgia pandering. We already proved we'd pay for Crash Bandicoot again, why did we have to pay for more things we've already played? But my enthusiasm was killed by the lumps of subhumans who got on my shit for daring to criticize anything Crash Bandicoot or Nitro Fueled related, in spite of the entire thing being questionable at best. We'll just have to wait and see. If the next game is a remake of Crash Bash, then count me officially out, because Crash has been back since 2016 and hasn't had an original thought since. If adding microtransactions to the remake of a great game doesn't prove to you that Activision sees absolutely no artistic merit in this series and only wants as much money as they could possibly squeeze out of us, then nothing will. Plus, if they're adding malicious microtransactions to the remake of a game, then I can only see this getting worse. I can only see this as the beginning of a very long downturn. Because Activision doesn't give a shit. In my opinion. However, if the next game is brand new, then I will happily eat my own words. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.